What's up, Falcons fans? Tori McElhaney joined by Terrin, Waack here in the Ticketmaster podcast studio. It's been a very busy Monday, and it's not even 11:30 in the morning. The reason being, we have introduced Jeff Ulbrich as the Atlanta Falcons' new defensive coordinator. You all know Jeff Ulbrich pretty well, and that was kind of the basis of I did an interview with him. You did an interview with him. He had his press conference.
Poor man.
He's going through the ringer. We call it the car wash around here. It's like when you go to each different station.
But I don't think you come out cleaner.
No, if anything, you come out way more tired. I know for me personally, I do. But Terrin, I'm really curious. You know, I have my thoughts about how the morning went, introducing him as the new defensive coordinator and all the things that he said. I think personally, I was very curious about how he was going to handle the day, because as we talked about in our previous Final Whistle episode, where it was Will McFadden and I made the comment that even as I was getting ready to write that Jeff Ulbrich was going to be the defensive coordinator, I knew what the fan reaction was going to be. And I knew that it was going to be a reaction of frustration, probably a bit of reservation. And I thought today was a really, really important day for Jeff Ulbrich to speak, not just to media, not just to you and I, but I think to the fan base as a whole, and kind of quell their frustrations, their reservations that this was the right decision. So I know that you had some time kind of one-on-one with him, and I don't want to get too deep into that interview because I know you're going to be writing about it later today. But what were some things that stuck out to you about his talking points on the day?
One of the things that stood out most to me was this whole concept of being a truth teller. And I think that being the first thing he said he took away from being an interim head coach, where it's like he was very candid of, I feel like people were scared of me. There was a shift as soon as I became this quote unquote head coach, that people were hiding things from me, my own coaches and coordinators, because I don't know, they didn't want to rock the boat. And
Yeah.
I was like, rattle.
You could rattle it too.
Yeah. And I think that gives him a really unique perspective. And if anything, the relationship with him and Raheem already being in place allows him to be that truth teller right from the get-go, rather than having to be like, how is he going to receive me being bluntly honest? And I think that will be beneficial. I think the question where it was like, why is this time going to be any different than last time, is always a fair one. Yeah. And I think he handled it well, where it was like, we're not the same people we were back then. We're not in the same roles we were back then. Those were interim, where you were just like put into that position. You didn't really interview for it. I don't really know what goes into those decisions way in the archives and whatnot, like how you decided who was the interim back then and what. But the point is, these were fleshed out decisions, both for Raheem Morris's hiring and Jeff Ulbrich's hiring, and they're in these roles for a reason. And where was I going before I distracted myself?
Well, I think that it's really interesting. I'm just going to piggyback off of that for a second.
Please do.
Because I thought that it's one thing to say that, yes, Raheem Morris and Jeff Ulbrich have grown as play callers. We all have. I'm not the same person that I was 4 years ago.
Gosh, no.
Right? Like, it would not be, that would just
we needed to leave.
Yes. Yeah. Him
stood
saying,
out to me.
Yeah. And not just saying like we needed to leave in order to like grow professionally as well as personally, but the fact that I felt what I gravitated towards in that conversation was the fact that he not only said like we needed to go somewhere else and have new experiences,
very different ones
with different play callers, different head coaches,
different
environments. One went to a Super Bowl winning team, the other one not so much with the Jets. And I think that I was really happy to have heard that he said, you know, my core values are always going to be what they are. And something that he talked to me about was his foundation as a play caller, as a coach, as a teacher, as a human, is this mantra of heart, mind, fist.
Yeah, I wrote that down while listening.
And that was, he was like, you'll hear it it's how we're going to start every single defensive meeting. It's what I live by. So he said that core principle has never changed. But what has evolved is what he said he coined as his football brain. And I loved how he used actual examples from his time here in Atlanta 5 years ago and how that's evolved. He kind of talked about this, the idea of multiplicity. That was a huge piece of, I think, his press conference and the day was because he was asked, are you going to be a 3-4 or 4-3? If y'all if you have listened to me talk ever in the last 5 years, I don't like that question.
It's not that simple
because
anymore.
That's not how modern day NFL defenses or even college, that's not how modern football is played. And so to ask that question, and he goes into this idea of multiplicity, but he also said, when I was here 5 years ago with Raheem as, inside linebackers coach and then defensive coordinator in the interim, he was like, I didn't feel like we did a good enough job having answers when an offense pivoted. And I liked how he used that as an example of the way that he felt like he had grown in his time with the Jets and using Robert Saleh and working off of him and different guys in that Jets defensive system to find, he was talking about, it's all about inserting more coverage, more elaborate blitzes, more. If you're doing the same thing, it's not gonna, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a very interesting juxtaposition to, I think a lot of the fan base is sitting there right now being like, well,
but here we're doing it again.
Exactly. Isn't this exactly that? And to me, it's like when someone sits up there and says, I'm a completely different person as a play caller, as a professional, I believe them because I don't think there's a person listening here or even talking on these mics that hasn't changed and evolved. I'm a much better journalist than I was at 22. Not saying that Jeff Ulbrich.
Was that only 4 years ago?
No, it wasn't.
Come on now.
I have a birthday coming up, and I you don't have to call me out like that. But
hey, I'm older, so I was like, whoa.
But no, I think that was something that I greatly took, was this idea of multiplicity
just
and
evolving,
and not just evolving from year to year, but
in the moment.
Yeah, moment to moment in a game.
Yeah. I think that is a big key thing. I don't think people should harp so much on the return just because things are so different. The sport is so different from 4 or 5 years ago. They're different people. The decisions made also.
True. Can't do anything about it.
As much as you scream, it's going into a void.
Right.
I'm sorry. And so I think for him to acknowledge it, though, is the right way to go about it. And he's like, I'm not the same. I'm going to evolve. All those things that you mentioned. And the thing that still sticks out to me most is this perspective he has from New York of being the interim head coach, and the fact that he just took away the two biggest things were being a truth teller and delegating.
Yeah.
I think is going to be so beneficial to Raheem Morris, where it's like, you care about all three. I got the defense. And I'm really curious too is the delegation part, because you basically have the big coordinator in Jeff Ulbrich. Then you have two mini coordinators in my mind with Mike Rutenberg and Jerry Gray. And one of the questions I asked was how do you make sure that's a good collaboration and not too many cooks in the kitchen?
Yeah.
And which, don't watch that YouTube video. It'll be stuck in your head forever. And the analogy has stuck with me. And he was like, I can't wait, but that is a good point.
Yeah.
Because they all have so much defensive experience, but he's like, that's the first thing we need to establish right away. In this 2 weeks of self-scouting, and he's like, we're going to go over all the Falcons stuff and how the defense is done and what's already in place. But then we're going to go over what I bring from New York. And then it's kind of like clean slate, picking and choosing and building a new beast rather than trying to train an old one.
Yeah.
And that was the analogy we used. I don't know. There were so many analogies. You know me.
I know.
I love an analogy.
But it's such a good point, too. And I think something that I was really, in my one-on-one with him, which you can find on AtlantaFalcons.com and also the YouTube channel. I believe it's up on YouTube right now. But I asked him, I was like, how are you, a different man, a different coordinator, sitting in front of me right now than the last time we spoke over a Zoom in 2020? And something that he talked about was
besides the beard.
And he did joke. He was like, besides the added gray in the beard. And I was like, that too. I was
Don't acknowledge it.
I was going to try and make a joke, but I was like, this seems like a serious interview. But I have to be serious right now. But he said seriously that his first year with Robert Saleh was very involved in defensive play calling.
Yeah.
Or maybe not play calling day of, but the defensive game plan. He said, but after that first year, he said Robert Saleh kind of took a step back and became more of the CEO type of head coach, where you're having to have conversations and you're looking at the team, not just through the lens of a defensive coordinator, but you have to look at the team as a whole and as an entire team.
Not a unit.
Right. And I do find that I think it's purposeful that he said that in that interview, because the best years for the Jets defense, which I know you have this pulled up, but the best years for the Jets defense was after that first year when it was Jeff Ulbrich's.
Yeah. Stat time.
Yeah.
Well, in 2021, they weren't even in the top 5. Do I have the 2020 numbers? I do. I was like, whoa. They ranked 29 in 2020.
Yeah.
They ranked 29th in yards, 19th in points, and 18th in turnovers. Mm-hmm. Wait.
And then
no, that's Atlanta. Wow. Oops. I was like, wait, not 2020. 2021.
Yeah.
Wow. Day's getting away from me. The Jets ranked 32nd in yards, 32nd in points, and 31st in turnovers. Sorry to just randomly throw a stray at the 2020 Falcons. But in 2021, the Jets jumped to 4th, and 29th.
Yeah.
But 4th and 4th. Like, that is from last to top 5 is crazy. And so when he said that in your interview, I was like, ding, flag.
Right.
Because then I followed up on it and was like, okay, since you're getting the full reins in year 1 with the Falcons, how confident are you that you can jump to that top defense level without that year of working under someone else, essentially?
Yeah.
And he broke my heart a little bit by saying stats are for losers, basically. Like, not another one. But
like,
it's more so like, because he is in control and because he has that experience of not stretching yourself too much as the head coach, he's like, I'm going to use myself and the mini coordinators, didn't call him that in my mind, but to make a strong defense, one that is able to adapt and change. He's like, I don't really care about the top 5, top 10. And he even referenced Raheem Morris in Los Angeles when Raheem took over what was the number 1 defense at the time. He's like, and he was questioned in his opening press conference of, what are you going to do to maintain the number 1 defense? And he's like, I'm not. Like, it's first of all not realistic to put that on someone immediately, but it's also like, who cares when what matters most is winning football?
Yeah.
Like, the nerd in me loves the numbers, but I do understand the most important one is the record. Who cares if you're a top 5 defense? The Jets were. And did the Jets do well in the past 4 years overall? You didn't see them winning Super Bowls. And so that is the point. And he emphasized that, where it's like, okay, yes, the Jets did well defensively, but as a team, they weren't making it to the Super Bowl. I want this team as a whole to do really well, and what I can do with the defense and help that overall goal. And I want a strong defense in that way.
I think something that I'm going to probably play around with in the next day in terms of like writing a column is kind of speaking to the fan base. It was really important to me. If you make it to the end of the one-on-one that I had with Jeff Ulbrich, I kind of set the stage of being like, look, let's be real for a second. There is a very passionate part of this fan base that has reservations about this decision. And the reason being is because it doesn't really happen at all that you see someone who was in an interim position leave and then 4 or 5 years later comes back and holds that same position.
And it's happened with 2 guys.
It's happened now with Raheem Morris and Jeff Ulbrich. So I understand the initial response to it. And I was like, but what can you say? What would you want to say to the fans that they can put their hope and trust in this? And he was very honest and candid about, I mean, words are nothing if you don't back them up, which is exactly what Raheem Morris said in his final press conference at the end of the 2024 season. It's the same thing that Terry Fontenot said at the end of the 2024 season. And I think like my response to that, and something that I may write about later today, is that I think as a fan base, and I'm probably going to get some heat for this, but like at least give him the chance to show you that he's different, that he's evolved, that this thing can look and feel different. I think kind of coming off the top and just being like, rinse and repeat, same old, like, okay, yes, let's get through that initial wave, but give him the opportunity to establish himself as the defensive coordinator in Atlanta. Yeah. Not with an interim tag, not as like Raheem Morris's buddy. Like, yeah, they're friends. And Raheem Morris did call him when the defensive coordinator position came available in Atlanta. Jeff Ulbrich said that. But beyond that, let the man establish himself for himself before coming to any conclusions. Ooh. No single, like, he hasn't even had conversations with players. Right. Yeah, like, that's not happened yet. He's still learning this coaching staff because, again, another part of this is that you insert Jeff Ulbrich into this defensive coaching staff, but a lot of these defensive coaches are carryovers from Jimmy Lake's staff. Literally almost all of them outside of 2.
Yeah.
So I say this, just like, let's taper expectations and let's take a breath and see what happens. And if in a year or 2 you can sit there and say, told you so, then you can sit there and say, told you so. That's great. Great for you, yippee. But at the end of the day, give them a shot to figure it out.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think this initial uproar, whatever you want to call it, would be as loud as it is had Raheem Morris pulled off a winning record and a playoff run in his first year? Because it was kind of like the same thing.
Yeah.
Where, like, what if he had come back and in year 1 accomplished those goals?
Right.
Do you think it would be the same, like, oh, here we go again, when the first one did what he said he was going to?
I mean, I think
does that make sense?
No, it does. And I think that it's a fair question to ask. Personally, when I look at it, I'm sitting here like, if this 2024 team lived up to the expectations that I think we all had, the fan base and you and I sitting here had for them, which was a winning record and a berth into the postseason. If we're sitting here talking about a team that did that, I actually don't know if Jimmy Lake would no longer be here.
Oh, right.
And
forgot about that.
Right. Like, I think that you had to, because of the fallout of that final game of the season defensively.
Yeah,
and
that one alone.
Also looking at, it wasn't like, you know, and I don't know what goes on behind closed doors too.
Right, but you see what I'm saying, where it's
yes.
like...
Well, I think that it's one of those things where I don't think that we're having a conversation about a new defensive coordinator if the Falcons went to the postseason.
Yeah.
I really don't, because I think even if that means you're winning a couple more games.
Yeah.
And that means that you are atop the NFC South, and I think regardless of how it ended, even if it wasn't pretty, I think you feel differently if you have those 2 notches in your belt.
Yeah, for sure. It's just...
But it's tough.
It's tough, and it's just interesting because these 2 decisions are just a year removed.
Yeah.
But they're so eerily similar.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting.
And if one was successful in the first place, I feel like you'd feel better about the second.
Yeah.
But if one was successful in the first place, would the second one even be made?
Chicken and egg. Yeah, and I think too that this is a very similar conversation. What's very interesting too is, to this point that you're bringing up, is that I didn't feel that the fan base was as angry.
No,
about
so that's why I think
Raheem.
Since the first one didn't work as well as they had wanted or thought initially. Yes. Not that it's not going to, but upon first season.
Right. Yeah. Well, the ire was built.
Yeah.
And the fire was stoked. And when the Falcons didn't live up to expectations and didn't put wins on the board and are sitting here not as NFC South champions and not having any appearance in the playoffs since 2017, like, that ire has just been building.
Yeah, the fire just keeps burning.
Yeah, to the point now where it's like, okay, the people who were mad about Raheem Morris being hired in the first place,
they're even more.
It's even louder. It's more passion. And I think if you had won more games, it wouldn't be as bad. But we're getting off track.
Yeah. My hypothetical went a little
I know, but it's
interesting. And I do think what's fun about Jeff Ulbrich already is because he had to deal with the New York media and the New York crowd, and then, like, newspapers just being literally everywhere still, which chef's kiss. But, like,
Yeah.
You see the post everywhere, and if it's in their aggressive headlines 9 out of 10 times, and it's like, okay, he's like, I'm ready, bring it.
Right, yeah.
He gets it.
He does.
So
and I think
that's why we get such candid responses and such honesty from him, which I've loved already.
Me too. And that was going to be my next question is, I've known Jeff Ulbrich. I covered him, when I was with The Athletic, when he was here the last time, same with Raheem. So I already kind of knew what I was getting. I know what type of person he is. I have a lot of respect for Jeff Ulbrich. And but this was your first time meeting him. So what were your initial thoughts?
I watched a few of his press conferences while prepping for today's interview, and I watched a few mic'd up. So it's weird feeling like you know someone before you know someone. But
I feel like every podcast we ever do with people, I'm like, I know your entire life story. It's a little creepy. And they don't know.
You barely know my name.
Right, yeah.
But I just really appreciated his bluntness and transparency and honesty. It didn't feel the most coach speak that we got was my actions will speak louder than my words. And I only say that's coach speak because as you've already listed, Raheem Moore said it, Terry Fontenot said it last year, this year. I'm ready to see it, but
we have so long until the ball gets put down. And that's the thing is I don't know what else you say. People are mad. Kind of how things are, and you don't want to talk yourself into the toilet bowl.
But just talking to him and his willingness to evolve and to acknowledge both faults, growths, etc., is really refreshing. Not that Jimmy Lake didn't do that at all. This is keeping it in a vacuum of one human being. But that, along with just talking through his mindset of still keeping a lot of the things he learned from New York, but also being willing to adapt what Atlanta already has and just create something new. I'm curious to see how that plays out, where if you see sparklings of last season from both entities, and then you also have a little bit of the LA stuff even more. So that I'm curious about. I think just his willingness, even with the joke about I'm willing to teach people in different ways. I know they're attached to their cell phones, all these cool ways. When he walked in the studio being I wish I could teach people on a green screen, players, and all these different creative ways. It's that's cool. That's cool to see and hear someone be evolving with the game. Because he even joked, there's coaches who are this is back in my day. And he's not like that. And I don't think Raheem is like that. We've seen even this past year just his openness and honesty too. So it'll be interesting to see them together. I'm ready to hear them duke it out a little bit. He joked that you're going to hear us screaming at each other possibly, but it's okay. It's just because we know each other. And I keep going back to the perspective he has, because in his end of season press conference with New York, he was asked what would you do differently? And something that stuck out to me so much was I would not be a head coach and coordinator. Oops, I hit the mic.
Yeah.
And it's just to admit that is, I don't want to say insane, but insane. Yeah. You just don't see that kind of honesty in those moments always.
It's refreshing.
Because it was just, he said it was too much. Because you want to focus solely on one thing, but you have to focus on everything else. And this aspect of being a truth teller where my own coaches weren't being completely honest with me at times. And it's I was one of them. So I think that's going to be such a benefit to Raheem. And that is mostly what I'm curious about, seeing how the defense can flourish with that.
Yeah. I am curious to see how he kept talking about how he wants to create something new with Raheem and something, quote, that hasn't been done before. And he said that a few times. And, there aren't examples yet that we can really get into because we don't know what this defensive roster is realistically going to look like come September.
There's so many options. You have Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata, who somebody called them old today, and that was crazy. But
in the NFL.
In the NFL world, you have them, but then you have Ruka Rororo and Brandon Durlis and Braylon Trice, who are so young and just getting started. Two ends of the spectrum, essentially. And then you have a bunch of players who are on one-year deals, Justin Simmons, Matthew Judon. How do you...
Yeah. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made.
There's a lot.
And Jeff Ulbrich was asked, how much input are you going to have on these decisions? He was I hope a lot.
I better have a lot.
Better have a lot. And I think that is, again, to your point, the candid and the candor of which he spoke about today, I really appreciated. And
there's a lot.
Yeah,
we're gonna have air.
Yeah, a lot up in the air, and I didn't expect Jeff Ulbrich to have all the answers to all the questions today, but sure as heck can ask those down the road as this roster gets filled out, because I have an inkling personally that there's going to have to be a lot of defensive moves made, whether it be in free agency or the draft. And I'm fully planning on multiple mock drafts this year, drafting an edge rusher or corner again. But I digress. We'll get to that when we get to that.
Bitter.
First, we got to go to the combine. Then we got to go through free agency. There's a lot of things between now and then. I know Will McFadden is literally leaving in like 24 hours to go to Mobile, Alabama to cover the Senior Bowl. So he'll be reporting from that. Terrin and I will be here in Atlanta reporting on the Jeff Ulbrich stuff. And man, nothing stops.
Yeah.
Just the grind keeps going. But at least now the Falcons have
vomited a lot about Jeff Ulbrich.
Hey, that's what the people came to hear. They wanted to know what you thought about Jeff Ulbrich. So thank you guys for joining us. We will be back at some point. We don't have anything penciled in right now, but there's always news when it comes to the Falcons. So I'm sure we'll be back very soon. In the meantime, have a good week. Hopefully there won't be any news and we can get away a little bit. That's my hope and my goal.
Yeah, stop listing things upcoming.
Sorry, I know. Let's take it one day at a time, 1 week at a time. But thank you all so much for listening. Go check out all of the content, my one-on-one, Terrin's exclusive interview that she'll be writing about, my column, everything on AtlantaFalcons.com. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Tori _McElhaney.
At Terrin Waack.
Yep.
I'll let you spell it yourself.
Yeah, it'll be down on the lower thirds. You can spell it. But thank you guys for joining us. From Ticketmaster Studio, I'm Tori. That's Terrin. We'll see you guys next time.
Today's episode of Falcons Final Whistle is brought to you by Zaxby's. And after a long game, when I'm tired and I need to refuel, I turn to Zaxby's. Their marinated, hand-breaded, fried to perfection chicken fingers, they hit the spot every time. Get yours with seasoned crinkle fries, a nice drink, and whichever of their 12 signature sauces you're feeling at the moment. But it always hits just right. So next time you need to refuel, go get yourself some Zaxby's.